Do you ever feel like a failure? Daily for me. When you're talking about things that are forthcoming, things in the future, new developments, it can be a whole lot of fun, but it gets to be really complex because there's a whole bunch of possibilities, a whole bunch of things that are going to really impact whether what you're thinking of is a success or not. Future's uncertain. It makes our job interesting. Often failure is the result of just incompetence and bad planning. But that's not really what I want to talk about. Sometimes ideas seem good, and experts think they're good, but they just don't work out. And that's really something I find to be fascinating, and I want to look at a number of them. So let's look at a number of failures, 5 of them in fact. First failure would be this. It's pretty, isn't it? What is it? It's the Lohner Porsche Mixed Hybrid Automobile 1900. You would think that hybrids, well, people started hearing about hybrids when the Prius came out. Well, the Prius was not the first hybrid. Before the internal combustion engine became the default way of making cars work, there were lots of options. This is a Studebaker 1901 pure electric car. This is a Stanley Steamer, a steam-powered car. So having alternate methods of making your car move wasn't originally all that surprising. The Lohner Porsche is I think, a particularly pretty version of all this. So why didn't hybrid cars like the Lohner Porsche succeed? Well, part of it has to do with how they were marketed. That's not really helpful, is it? From what I read, the Lohner Porsche was largely, like most electric cars and hybrids, marketed towards women drivers. Why? Well, they didn't have as long of a range as internal combustion cars. So just going around town, and men would have to drive more. Also, they were a lot more reliable than internal combustion engines. And you certainly wouldn't want to risk having your wife have the car break down on them. It's strange that reliability worked against them. But the net result of these was that if you wanted a serious car, and if you wanted to be a serious driver, you needed internal combustion, because only serious drivers would be able to fix stuff. Only serious drivers would be driving more than a mile down the road. Plus, it didn't help that this was a time where men pretty much controlled a whole lot of things about women's lives, including how far away from home they could go and how much money they could spend. Sexism. It's not just today. Another failure is the first smartphone. Now, I know what you're thinking. The first smartphone, that was surely the first iPhone. No. It was the IBM Simon, which predated the first iPhone by quite some time. Why did the IBM Simon not work? Well, number of reasons. The first of anything tends to be relatively expensive, and this was released in 1995 for $1,100, which, according to the inflation calculator, works out to almost $2,200 in 2023 money. That's a lot of money for something which was at the time a real novelty. This was also in the early days of cell phones in general, and a smartphone requires a lot more energy than an old dumb phone would. Battery life got to be an issue, and I found this to be hilarious. If you charged up your IBM Simon for 14 hours, you'd get about an hour of battery use out of it. But it was also ahead of its time. People didn't know they wanted or needed a smartphone because such a thing had never existed. The first product in any new area hardly ever succeeds. It's almost always people who take someone's initial vision and refine it, alter it, improve it, who succeed, and the first one kind of falls away in the dust. Another failure would be the first high-definition home experience of movies, the HD DVD. There were first videotapes, then there were DVDs, but when people wanted to move towards high definition, they needed new software. And normally, the way this works is when someone wants to come out with a new format of something, a bunch of competing formats battle each other to the death. And that's kind of what happened with Blu-ray versus HD DVD. HD DVD had a lot of industry backing, and it ran off of software that was made by Microsoft. Microsoft at the time was a huge company, larger and more important than they are today even. Blu-ray didn't have very many manufacturers behind them. They only had Sony. Well, you would think on the surface that Microsoft versus Sony at the time, Microsoft would surely dominate, right? When they have the backers of all electronics makers except for Sony. Well, Sony managed to get the Blu-ray as default equipment in the PlayStation 3, which was a shocking success. And that pretty much ended HD DVD. You want another failure? You ever heard of Google Glass? Google Glass was Google's attempt to bring augmented reality to individuals. Augmented reality is the idea that you have some device that allows you to, when you look at something in the world, pull up more information. If you're looking at a painting, it can pull up information about the painter and give you some more details available on command. The idea with Google Glass is that you go to a town, look at a restaurant, hit a button, and immediately get the menu pop up in your eyeballs. There's a problem with Google Glass, though. It didn't look cool. It looked pretty goofy. Plus, people were really kind of creeped out about the idea of someone walking around with a camera on their head 24/7, which could then connect to information they found online about people. There were bars and restaurants which would specifically have no Google Glass requirements. Google Glass didn't work very well as a retail product. Google kept it and altered it and made it an industrial product instead, used in manufacturing and such. And Google has never really given up on the idea of augmented reality as a consumer device. The Google Smart Contact Lenses. I remember when I first saw the patent for their first attempts at smart contact lenses, I thought, ooh, goody, that's creepy. They're still working on it. Last failure, this is a pretty big one. We're so used to having computers, computer labs, computers on our phones, computers on our wrists and everything, that we forget that computers aren't historically all that new, particularly home computers. Early computers tended to be very text-centric, but Xerox had a computer called the Alto, which in 1973 had a graphic user interface and a mouse. 1973, 50 years ago, as of the filming of this video. It was a research device. Tests proof of concept. There wasn't really a home computer market at the time. They did actually release it as a commercial product in 1981 as the Xerox Star. But it was pricey. You thought the IBM Simon was pricey? Well, in 1981, a Xerox Star setup would cost you $16,595, which translates currently into over $55,000. Would you pay over $55,000 for a home computer when no one knew what you could do with computers and the internet didn't really exist? It was really ahead of its time. I want you to think about all this stuff in relation to the article we just read about fake meat. No, not that fake meat. Lab-grown meat. A lot of whether it succeeds or fails is going to be based on factors other than how good it is, how efficiently it's made. So those are things you should probably start thinking of. What other factors might be involved in its success or eventual failure? Yeah, you really can't prove what's about to happen or how people in the future are going to react. Doesn't mean we can't talk about it, though. It just means that because there's so many different factors that we can't quite get our hands on, we're going to have to really get used to narrowing down on every possible mitigating factor, looking at every contingency and broadening the scope of the analytical lens in which we bring. And that means we're going to have to be fairly specific about the subject. It's doable. See you in the next video, y'all.